And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
Today we're joined by Nicholas Hormann. Nick grew up in Hawaii and he graduated from the Yale School of Drama in their professional acting program. In addition to acting in television and film, Nick has performed on Broadway and off Broadway and in regional theaters across the country, around the country. During the pandemic, Nick has been taking a creative writing class specializing in autobiographical narrative at Pasadena City College. And one of the pieces he wrote is about his experience as an actor working at theater at Boston Court, where they're preparing to open Stephen Sondheim's play Passion 48 hours before the show was about to open. The state issued an order closing down all public facilities because of the coronavirus. And he writes about that, and we're going to open the show with Nick reading this piece. So please welcome Nick Hormann.
A little over a year ago, a company of actors assembled to rehearse Stephen Sondheim's Passion at the Boston Court, Pasadena. It's our first read-through. I've done this countless times, but the cast members are all new to me, and a scintilla of nerves turns my hands cold. We sit ready, scripts open, pencils sharpened, highlighters poised. The director, Michael MICHETTI, welcomes us warmly. The eyes of the younger actors shine, the blonde wood floors illuminating their expectant faces, and we read the play. The actors alert and attentive to each other. It's a spirited, diverse group, multiracial and multi-generational. Already they're lifting words off the page, lofting them into the air with thought and feeling. The sweet breath of life fills the room, presses on me, and I go home happy. Several weeks later, in early March during preview week, the soaring currents of Sondheim's score were sweeping audiences to their feet. Thursday morning, March 12th, arrived, and we were cautioned to invite only family members to the performance that night. Hours earlier, Governor Newsom had advised canceling large public gatherings. By Thursday afternoon, our run had been canceled, 48 hours from opening. Now only ghosts inhabited the theater, the stage dark and empty as a cave. Last night's sweaty costumes still hanging in hallways, rain puddled in the empty parking lot. Actors dropped by in the next days to collect belongings, distancing themselves, an awkward new behavior. Only days earlier, we had clustered in the wings, the audience hushed, the orchestra playing, we breathing as one. Imagine each day, everyone in the world inhales billions of Shakespeare's atoms. It's true. And then taking the stage for an exalted 90 minutes, singing, speaking, mingling, touching, the audience close at hand, right through to the end. The calamity and suddenness of our shutdown, the devastation, the horror and sorrow of the virus, its unfathomable toll, my own age, have caused me to look back recently on what drew me to the theater long, long ago, and how that evolved over time. The late 1960s found me teaching on Taiwan and contemplating a career in the US Foreign Service or in international affairs. I lived on a quiet university campus amid cane fields and sheltering acacias. Students smiled and stood respectfully when I entered the classroom. In 1968, violence tore through the US after the assassinations of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. War protests swept the country and demonstrations disrupted the Democratic Convention. My focus changed radically and I pivoted homeward. One day, sitting in a hut outside the university gates and sweating over a steaming bowl of noodle soup, my eye caught a magazine story describing a bundle of cool-sounding revolutionary plays being presented at the Yale Repertory Theater. Their groovy titles got my attention: Viet Rock, Dynamite Tonight, We Bombed in New Haven. And when I returned to the States, I applied to the professional actor training program at the Yale School of Drama. When I was accepted, I instantly faced a steep learning curve. I was a novice. I had never taken an acting class. This new profession demanded physical strength, grace, quick reflexes, control, vocal dexterity, mental sharpness, emotional availability, a lively imagination, and sheer stamina. The regimen required all-out commitment and a surrender of ego. It was tough. By the end of our first year, half the class had fled or were cut. We were down to 8. Our days were devoted to physical and mental conditioning, voice, text work, singing, gymnastics, fencing, and mask improv. Long afternoons were filled with acting exercises and theater games drawn from Viola Spolin. A whole afternoon might be spent on the New York subway or recreating a dinner scene from a Charles Dickens novel. But by my second year, I could feel a change coming over me. Politics now eclipsed by a growing reverence for this new shared human activity. Oscar Wilde writes, "The theater is where we share with one another the sense of what it is to be a human being." And so it was with my class, this close-knit band of adventurers, breathing life into make-believe realities created from nothing, moments lived fully together and gone in an instant. In a conservatory, students learn by watching and performing with their teachers. It's a kind of handing off from master to apprentice, and so it was at Yale. I marveled at Alvin Epstein's miraculous transformation from old man to tree, Christopher Walton's sinister snakiness in Caligula, Kenneth Haig's British spit and polish malevolence in The Revenger's Tragedy, Lee Richardson's rugged rootedness in Macbeth, Leonard Fry's addled buffoonery in The Bourgeois Gentleman, Dick Shawn's badass comic daring in a play about the Marx Brothers, and Carmen de Lavalade's grace-bestowing, silence-filling movement. All this and more. It's a long, long list. True to a conservatory, creativity crossed generations. Our teachers watched and learned from us as well. And what stays with me is the intergenerational nourishment of my apprenticeship. Just out of drama school, I was offered a job with a Broadway repertory company where, over 2 seasons, I continued to find my own style through observation and imitation, often playing with actors much better than me, actors of all ages. Thereafter, I also began to work in the regional theaters we had been trained for, establishing friendships with writers, directors, designers, and actors across the land, many unknown to the general public. It's a fertile landscape. And I continue to explore within my range my potential for transformation, for change in roles like Cyrano de Bergerac, Abraham Lincoln, Atticus Finch, and Laurence Olivier. If there is a constant in theater, it is change. And I welcomed it, I embraced it, the doing of a play and the moving on, leaving that thing behind and picking up the new, the untried. And a note of gratitude here to my long-suffering wife and son who put up with my truancy over the years. Maggie Smith says, every performance is like a ghost. It's there and then it's gone. And now passion is gone, apparently. And yet tonight, I hear the voices in that warmly lit room a year ago and the days that followed before the cataclysm, when all was fresh and full of promise, days that breathe with life for me still, no ghosts. Days that rekindled in me the acute pleasure I still get from performing with a talented group of players of every age and every description, aware that younger actors might be watching me as I watched my teachers years ago, surprising and delighting each other, breathing the same air, Shakespeare's air, and knowing deep down, as the company of passion now have had to accept with bittersweet finality, that yes, all we can really do is try to create eternity from fleeting moments together and keep our gaze steady, forward, ready to embrace the changes that lie ahead in the unfolding story.
Nicholas Hormann, welcome to Animal Farm.
Thank you.
Lovely. You wrote another story that really focused on your audition for Yale, which actually occurred in San Francisco at what I think was the American Conservatory, ACT.
That's right, 450 Geary Street.
450 Geary Street, yeah.
Right, across the street from the theater.
And you had flown in from Hawaii, where you grew up for this audition. So my question is, how on earth did you, somebody like you, wind up or growing up on an island far away from the mainland? And what was the circumstance of that? And then to go from there to Yale. It's quite an extraordinary.
I know. It's a long story, but the short version is that years ago in the early 20th century, there's a polyglot population in Hawaii, including a small German-speaking community in 1900 who were in commerce and worked with the sugar industry. And there was a German-speaking Lutheran church, but when World War I broke out, German nationals went back to Germany, and this Lutheran church was under the auspices of the Prussian Lutheran Church, not affiliated with an American institution. So they needed, the pastor went back to Germany. They needed a pastor who was German-speaking, Lutheran, but American-born, and that was my grandfather, who was teaching. He was teaching history in a small college in Wisconsin because he had studied at the University of Berlin, but he had a divinity degree. And so out they went. Actually, a great uncle of mine was the first brewmaster of the Primo Brewery in Honolulu. And he suggested my grandfather. So my grandfather used to joke that beer and the Bible brought the Hormann. So there we were. And the thing, I know, and I'm such a Howley, and yet, because as I've might have said before, there's no majority population in Hawaii. So you grew up in a pidgin culture. Now I'm talking about 60 years ago. Everybody spoke pidgin in the playground, because on a plantation, you've got Haoles, Koreans, Chinese, Japanese, Puerto Ricans, Portuguese, Samoans, Filipino, everybody. So you got to, and pidgin is a good feeling language. It's the common language. You make fun of each other because everybody's fair game. So, and I can give you a sample.
That was going to be the next request.
Okay. You may not hear this ever again. And no offense. Okay, here we go. Once upon a time, Kiki Wahine stay called by the name Little Lepuahi. She stay live with her mother by the edge of the Hau Tree Forest. On the other side of the Hau Tree Forest, stay live her old sick tutu. One day, Little Lepuahi, she tell her mother, "Hey, ma, more better I go visit my old sick tutu, stay live the other side of the Hau Tree Forest." Her mother go tell, "Yeah." So Little Lepuahi, she hop by her pukalahala basket down Oahu market for buy some cow. Inside the market, she buy one manapua, one lau, one spam musubi, one breadfruit, and one malasada as Portuguese junk food. She throw the cow inside her pukalahala basket. She take off through the forest. Her mother tell, "Hey, inside the forest, don't talk to nobody." Little Lepuahi, she tell, "Yeah, aloha then." Inside the forest, stay live one big fat pua'a. This one mean connect. You mess with him, bro. You moppy. Stay lying on top one lava rock, drinking okole help. Look. He little boy, he coming down the path. He go, ass one sharp looking wahine. He climbed down, he step out, he go, "Hey, how's it? The hell?" Little boy, she spoke to Portia. Go, "Oh, wait, what I going to do now? My mother tell me, no talk to nobody." The boy smile, plenty ho, male, arasaki go, "Pehea, boy." She go, "My kite in Nova. Hey, hakamea ho. What are you doing? Where are you going?" She go, "I go in, visit my old sick tutu, stay live the other side of the Hau Tree Forest." She go, "Oh yeah, another place. Atama smart, sly mongoose, huh? He know one shortcut. He say, "Ahui ho." He take off. He go Makai, past the heya, over the irrigation ditch, through the sugarcane field, through the taro patch, through the watercress patch, through the taro patch, past the Manahuni fish pond, past Pearl Harbor, behind Wong's Bar and Grill, past the Japanese language school. Sensei konnichiwa, watachi tatwa. Bye. He come to Tussali. He knock on top of the door. Okay.
Yeah. Was that part of your vocabulary growing up? Was this part of your exchanges, or just what you overheard?
I worked that story. No, yeah, it's no. I'd speak it in the playground because if you want Howley going Manoa Elementary School, you have to talk pidgin. Garen Barbarian, the most going to give you puff lip.
Yeah.
So survival. And I once told that story for Gordon Davidson at the Mark Taper Forum, and he invited me to put together a program of Hawaiian pidgin stories for the Itchy Foot Literary Cabaret.
Yes.
So I did that, and all the expat Hawaiians came out from everywhere, Torrance and everywhere.
That's delightful.
And a wonderful actor named Keone Young called me up and he said, "Hey, what's going on? What is this pidgin stuff, you Howley?" And so I asked him, "Come on, share the stage with me." Later on, I was invited to play a role at East West Players of a pidgin-speaking Howley in a play by Ed Sakamoto. You know him? He's a Hawaii-born playwright. Yeah, I couldn't. I was doing something else. Anyway, so that's the pidgin thing, and maybe that's why I became an actor, because you hear all these things in your ear.
No, you can. It's clearly it's clearly resonating inside. It's part of you. It's worked its way in.
I can remember one voice teacher at Yale asking me where I was from, and I said Hawaii. She said, I thought so. I said, why? He said, there's something soft about the speech. Anyway.
Interesting. Tell me, you've been on Broadway, you've been off Broadway, you've done the regional theaters. If you could tell us one of your most humiliating moments in the professional theater and one of your triumphs.
The humiliating one was a play called Moose Murders. That was one of the all-time box office flop, opened and closed in one night. And it was a comedy written for Eve Arden. And I was hired to play in this play. And about 2 weeks in, I could see it was a turkey. It wasn't going to go anywhere. I can remember.
What year was this? And then this was on Broadway.
This was 1983. It was on Broadway at the Eugene O'Neill Theater, and it was a stinker. And people ask me, well, why did you accept it? Well, there weren't that many plays on Broadway, and and I could hear Eve Arden's voice delivering. I thought on paper it sounded funny and in the hands of the right creative team, but it didn't go anywhere. I can remember calling my agent during a rehearsal break and asking, how can I get out of this? And he said, you can shoot yourself in the foot. And so anyway, the humiliating part was that during preview performances, audiences got the whiff that this was a thing, don't miss this before it goes away. And so they would be hooting and hollering, and we had to, brave it out. I had a feeling of kind of a Brechtian alienation effect. I had this curious sensation of acting the role outside of it. Yeah. Standing alongside it, and I'm just saying, oh God. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it opened on, and I can remember, they replaced Eve Arden with Holland Taylor, and we had to end in a kiss. And one night in previews, Holland Taylor whispered to me, just think about next Thursday morning, because we were to open the next Wednesday. And then, true enough, by Thursday, we were history. I have one little PS. Years later, the first call I got in the morning was my agent congratulating me that I hadn't been mentioned by any of the three dailies. Second was the producer saying, we're sorry to say we have to close the show. And the third was that Playwrights Horizons called me and invited me to rejoin the cast of The Dining Room.
Oh, you'd left off Broadway to join
to go to do this,
Broadway, to step on up into the glory.
Years later, I went into Joe Allen, which is a famous actors theater, which is whose walls are adorned with show cards, posters of flops, only flops, and it's an impressive number. And I walked in there to meet a friend, and above the maitre d's podium was Moose Murders. Yeah. And I said, I was in that. That's me. That's my name. He took me by the elbow, walked me to the bar, and said, give this man a drink. It's on the house.
And what about the Triumph?
Triumph is Execution of Justice, I think, by Emily Mann, which was done in 1986. It had a wonderful cast. And it was about the murder trial of Dan White, who murdered George Moscone. And
where was this performed?
This was at the Virginia Theater on Broadway.
Okay. Another Broadway. Okay.
Another Broadway house, Virginia Theater, now called the August Wilson Theater. It had a wonderful cast of, John Spencer, Earl Himes Jr., Stanley Tucci, Wesley Snipes shared a dressing room with me. And he was playing an extravagant San Francisco figure. This takes place in San Francisco, called Sister Boom Boom. And he'd come in a half hour and start to assemble his stuff, put on the makeup and the hair, wig and high heels, and it was like this gorgeous 7-foot woman. Anyway, so but the thing that was important about the play was that it was not only a crackling courtroom drama, because it was about the trial, the prosecution of Dan White, but it was also I thought a deep analysis of the social cost of homophobia. In this case, and I played the district attorney, a man named Joe Freitas, and I called him when I was preparing the role, and he said, "Yeah, we just misread our beloved city. We didn't realize." Well, yeah, and Dan White, of course, got off with a very light sentence. He was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. Yeah. Well, so that was an important play, but. Which had a respectable run, but challenge shy Broadway audiences don't necessarily want to be challenged in that way. So,
yeah. but something you can remember on your scorecard that you carry with you and going, that was worth the effort.
That was worth the effort. And in commercial theater, that says something, right? It was it had done the nonprofit circuit, but it ended up on Broadway. Anyway.
During the pandemic, we have one thing in common, is we've used the time that's been hurled at us, which is a kind of gift. And we've both been working our way through playing the piano. We both have music backgrounds, although we're not by no means anything approaching professional musicians. I speak for myself, not for you.
You can speak for
you can speak for you too. And I've been working, you had written me a while ago that you were working your way, I believe, through the Bach partitas, but you not confined to Bach. I'm working my way through some fairly elementary preludes, and that is it. And my wife is saying, are you ever going to move on, to something beyond? How about some Rachmaninoff or something with some texture or melody, please? So I've kind of discovered things about what music brings back. And I was wondering, in terms of sense, memory, coordination, even memory itself suddenly springs back, and sense memory from childhood comes back, even though I'm not playing the same songs I played, the same pieces I played. And I was wondering if you could address that, and perhaps you could play something for us.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah, sort of akin to Shakespeare's words. They don't have meaning until they're lifted off and they're just black dots on the page until you find meaning in the sounds of it. And I'm finding many treasures that I didn't know anything about by returning to the pieces I played in my childhood. There is a Bach little solfeggetto that I'm just trying to bring back, actually. And let's see if I still...
Yeah, let's give it a whirl.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you. I was wondering if we could close out with a piece you wrote in this same class about actually growing up in Hawaii and about your dad, who was struck down with polio. And it's a very emotive story. I was wondering if you could share it.
Yes, I'd be happy to. Okay. Darn. Here it is. I mean, what do you say? Daddy was walking, and then one day when I was 10, he wasn't. At age 3, barefoot, I accompanied him to the end of the street in the morning light, my 3 skippy steps barely matching one of his long, loose-limbed strides. My hand in his, he would lead me to a place where a hedge marked the end of the road. Beyond lay Mid-Pacific Institute, a boarding school spread over vast lawns, playing fields, and wild places, all wonders to be explored in later boyhood. Grass sliding, softball, fishing for tadpoles, swimming naked in Manoa Stream. There were fewer people in the valley then. But at age 3, that all lay ahead. Now Daddy releases my hand and passes through a break at one side of the road's end, vanishing behind a bordering jungle of haole koa trees. I stand alone, waiting, the soft tropical sun warming my shoulders. Minor birds chatter. Trade winds from the upper valley rustle the leaves of the royal palms, and plumerias sweeten the air. Now I gaze Mackay, wondering where my father went, excited by the mystery of it. And then with a leap of my heart, I see him off in the distance, standing tall and straight on a bluff where the campus road rounds a lava stone dormitory. Daddy turns back then and looks my way. I'm his only son. His suit flutters in the stiff breeze on that promontory, and his necktie flies over his shoulder. He raises an arm now and waves and smiles, and I wave. And then in a moment, he turns away and moves out of sight around the building, head high, striding in his big man shoes, off to lecture at the university at the other side of the boarding school. In 1955, our father got polio. On Thanksgiving Day, his legs gave out. The family had been vaccinated, but not Dad yet. At age 49, he was not a likely victim of infantile paralysis. Everything in our family turned instantly kapakahi, Hawaiian for messed up, upside down. I began misbehaving in school, unable to control myself, apparently. I became a smart aleck. One day during recess, a breezy sarcasm of mine landed on the ears of our teacher, and in the next instant, his massive hand had laid hold of my arm. And shortly after, I found myself in the principal's office where my mother sat, anxious, worried. As I understand a little better now, I seem to have been at sea about the catastrophe and chaos that had befallen our family, angry and confused, possibly, and seeking attention, I suppose, at school to compensate for the cratering of our family life, for the cavern that had been carved out of the center of our little parochial world. I couldn't make sense of anything. During the first week of polio, my father was quarantined at Queen's Hospital. We visited him from a parking lot under a monkey pod tree. A distant child's voice implored, "Mommy, I like to go home. I don't like to stay." Our mother struggled to keep the family functioning. I had two older sisters and a third sister by then, age 2. It dawned on me at some point that I had now become the man of the family in a manner of speaking, and I began gradually to assume a more dutiful role, at the same time casting about for direction and purpose in my own life. In the months that followed, as Daddy moved home and began therapy and rehabilitation, I learned how his wheelchair worked, how to spot him as he transferred from chair to car and back, how to fold the chair and stow it in the rear of the station wagon, and then to unload it and reopen it again. Dad's road to recovery was arduous. But by the following fall, he had returned to the classroom. In a photo, he is standing in the lecture hall in full leg braces and supported by aluminum Canadian crutches, smiling, doing what he did very well, teaching a class of diverse young University of Hawaii students. It's a rainbow of faces. I spent the summer of 2020 reading his academic journal articles on race relations in Hawaii, and it rekindled my admiration for his ability to get inside other people's skins, to walk in their shoes, a gift that lends personal warmth to his writing. In June 1956, I completed my 6th grade year, chastened and still a bit shaky. I resolved to try to be more grown up. It was a fledgling effort. I applied myself to piano. I tried to be more helpful around the house. My men's shoes fit awkwardly, and I acquired a curious feeling of insufficiency at that time. Mom had her hands full, and when she got impatient, butterflies danced in my stomach, and we all walked on eggshells. Her outbursts were followed by remorseful atonements, and I felt during those days that I never quite measured up. I sought to please through accomplishment, an exhausting enterprise that sometimes left me churning with inner resentment. At age 14, a sleek surfboard gave me some afternoons of relief at Prince Kuhio Beach Park, where I would sit quietly on my board out of the offshore break, waiting for the next perfect wave to lift me up silently and carry me out of my life for a few hallowed hours. Through those years, our father uncomplainingly taught and wrote, served on the governor's commission on the handicapped, and regularly clowned for us at the dining room table, his face turning bright red with glee as we all laughed at him tying a napkin around his nose. Still, now, today, a quietness descends on me at unexpected moments as I suddenly glimpse Daddy walking to school in the early morning light, tall in the distance, turning back to wave at me, smiling. and then striding off purposefully on a perfect Hawaiian day.
Nicholas Hormann, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steve. Ahui ho.
Next week, we're joined by Jessica KUBZANSKY. Jessica is a director, a playwright, and the artistic director of the theater at Boston Court.